All right, well, let me introduce Christina McLaughlin. She is in the Urban and Community Forest, or she is the Urban and Community Forestry Coordinator with the New York State Department of Conservation. She oversees the New York ReLeaf program. She has a Bachelor of Science in Zoology and a Master of Science in Biodiversity, Conservation, and Policy. Her thesis was about public knowledge of invasive species. And we also have Amy here that slid in from Queens today, so thank you for that. Led us on a wonderful trip around Central Park last week. And she's an urban forester with New York DEC. She serves as the New York ReLeaf Committee co-chair in the Capital District and Eastern Adirondacks. And Amy has a forestry management degree and a long history of working with trees. So with that, I'm going to let both of them, Christina can share her screen and tell us all about ReLeaf.
Thanks, Sarah. Let me bring my slides on up. Hi, everyone. As Sarah said, my name is Christina. I'm the partnership coordinator for the Urban and Community Forestry program. Our program coordinator is actually Gloria, so she oversees the entire program. But I'm going to get into that a little bit in this presentation tonight. This is going to be a very broad level overview of urban forestry in New York, and then we'll get into the ReLeaf program specifically that I oversee, and then the 25 million trees initiative that's kind of come up this year out of the governor's office. So thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm glad to see a bunch of folks here. As I said, we're going to go from the very broad strokes of what is urban forestry, who the players are in New York, who our big partners are, both in New York and at the national level. Then we'll dive a little bit into the urban program in New York, what the different aspects of our program are. And then we'll talk a little bit about 25 million trees. And the ReLeaf program falls under that kind of broad urban community forestry program umbrella. It's one of our kind of major pillars of the program. So what is urban forestry? I think this is a great question to start with. It gets thrown around a lot now as it's been getting a lot of attention in the last year or two. But just to make sure we're all on the same page, I like to start with some definitions and backgrounds. And my favorite opening quote is this one here, that trees aren't just scenery, they're life-giving infrastructure. And that was Jad Daly. He's the Chief Engagement Officer of American Forests. They're a national level urban and community forestry nonprofit. We work with them on a whole bunch of stuff. He said this last year at the World Forum on Urban Forests that we were able to attend. And I think that's really a core piece of urban forestry. As a program, we've moved from trees are not just a nice to have, they're a need to have in our communities. They're part of our green infrastructure. They offer a whole lot of benefits to public health, to beauty, to our communities, that make them just a critical part of the community. They shouldn't be an afterthought. They should be part of the planning process. And that's kind of the overarching view of urban forestry as a program. If you ever look at some of the stuff from the U.S. Forest Service, they define urban forests as the trees for people where they work, live, and play, which is another fun way of thinking about the trees that we're talking about. We're talking about the trees that you might see in your cities, your towns, your villages. So those can be trees that are lining your streets, things in parks, some of those natural areas that are around the edges of your cities. Yard trees are also included in this. All these trees in any sort of human developed area is the urban forest. As far as forestry goes, urban forests are a little bit more of a newer field. You may think of forestry as that classic silviculture type thing, looking at places like the Adirondacks, big stretches of continuous forest. But we're kind of looking at a fragmented environment of lots of little trees in urban forestry. We have a general focus on individual trees more than groups of them, but there's a shift even now in urban forestry to looking at some of those like parks and natural areas and viewing the urban forest as this kind of continuous stretching green area that kind of wraps around all of our buildings, and making corridors of greenery that make it more connected and how they interact with each other. But in general, we're usually talking a little bit more about individual trees when we're talking about urban forestry. We do tend to focus, as I said, on public trees. So public trees are things that are publicly accessible. These are trees in the right of way. So that kind of lawn between the road and the sidewalk, or the lawn, the road and the buildings. Your streets, your parks, things around public buildings, those would be public trees. This can also include nonprofit lands, things that are openly accessible for everyone to use. The other half of the urban forest are yard trees, privately owned tree canopy. They do play a really big role in the overarching urban forestry field, but they're a little bit more complicated for a state agency to get involved with because it's a lot more complicated to be involved with. Obviously, we don't have jurisdiction over yard trees and private trees, so they're an important part of the urban forest, but we work with partners who work with those. There are a lot of nonprofits that can help with planting trees in yards and doing things like that. So hence my title being partnership coordinator. You're going to hear the word partner a lot tonight. There's a lot of groups and people that we work with, just like the urban forest is made up of a lot of different pieces. The programs that kind of oversee these trees are a lot of different. You'll also hear us refer to it as the urban and community forestry program. Sometimes we shorten it to just community forestry. Sometimes it's just urban forestry. Although academically, it's usually urban forestry for a term. I like community forestry depending upon where I am. Especially in New York, we like to recognize that we're talking about trees in any developed area. That includes our small towns and villages. It doesn't have to be just our main cities. But I recognize that when we use the word urban, a lot of people jump to New York City, to downtown Schenectady, to downtown Albany. And so they may not hear themselves in that word urban forestry. So we try to make sure that we're being a little more inclusive with our language. So urban and community forestry tries to capture that trees where people work, live, and play. If you work, live, and play in a small community in the Adirondacks or the Catskills, you can still have an urban forestry program, even though you may not think of yourself as a big urban center. It's just kind of a semantics type thing. And I've talked to community coordinators around the country in some of the other states, and they have the same issues that we run into, where like you kind of have to know your audience a little bit when you're talking about urban forestry as we expand. And we finally have some of the capacity to expand besides outside of looking at just our cities and offering support to smaller communities and villages who also have street trees. I love this photo that Olean submitted. If you've ever been out to Olean, it's far southern tier, Western New York. It is not a huge town, but they did this huge redevelopment plan on their main drag. They want that like small town feel with lots of nice trees. They did this whole reparking area to slow people down. And it's just a really nice picture with like the rolling Allegheny Hills in the background. And yet it's a developed area. So we're still talking urban forestry, even though I think a lot of people would look at that and not, the word urban doesn't really pop into it. So for urban forestry, as I mentioned, we're kind of getting a lot of attention in the last couple of years. The Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, at the federal level gave a whole bunch of money to the federal urban forestry program to dole out to states and nonprofits and through them to communities to do urban forestry work. When we talk about how big the issue is, they had $1.5 billion in the IRA that was given to the Forest Service. It was meant to fund 10 years worth of urban forestry work. And that's in addition to the regular money that the Forest Service gets for the urban forestry program. They get funding every year, and that is a whole different story. This was a one-time Inflation Reduction Act funding, supposed to do 10 years worth of effort. And when they went out with the public ask to communities and nonprofits to put in for projects, they had $6 billion worth of ask. The 1.5 billion was already, I think it was 7 or 8 times the normal amount that we have in urban forestry, and yet the ask was still so much bigger. There's so much work to be done. Urban trees need a lot of care. We need to replant trees in a lot of area. And this IRA grant, a lot of people are hoping is just kind of our first steps towards doing a lot of this work. The 1.5 billion is still going to go a really far way. But I think the Forest Service really recognized that there's still a lot more to be done. That's been one of our messaging. So now we've kind of talked a little bit about urban forestry on the whole, this kind of broad level scope. What is it? What are we talking about? Public trees. I'm going to talk a little bit more now about New York's urban forestry team specifically, of which Amy and I are part. And then we'll get into some of our other partners and folks who are involved. I do like to start with a little bit of background on the New York State DEC, which is where Amy and I both work. DEC, Department of Environmental Conservation. We do have 9 regions around the state. We are headquartered here in Albany. The building downtown with that big green dome on it is the DEC main office. You may hear us refer to it as central office. And then there are the 9 regions around the state. A lot of people, I think, aren't super familiar with how we're divided up. Our regions are different from other agency regions too, just to be extra confusing. But this is our kind of map. It is available on the public website, so you can kind of see what's near you. Being Schenectady based, you're part of what we call Region 4, which includes Albany, Rensselaer, and it's broken up by county, so you can kind of see where we are. Region 4 gets the benefit of having not just the regional office, which is in Schenectady, but also having central office based in Region 4. And on this map, all the little green dots are sub offices. So we don't just have our big main office. We often have some smaller offices within the region. Sometimes those are very forestry focused, like some of the ones that are a little closer to particular state lands. But overall, this is all the offices for the DEC is operating out of. It doesn't include all the campgrounds and state forests and some of the other smaller places, but main offices. We are within the Division of Lands and Forests. So within the agency, Division of Lands and Forests, and within the Division of Lands and Forests is the Urban and Community Forestry Program. So that's where we fall and where we're operating. We do have 4 of us at the state coordination staff level. So as I said, I'm the partnership coordinator and I oversee the education and outreach efforts. Our program coordinator is Gloria Van Dyne. So she's our overarching chief running the whole program. She's our section lead. Our technical coordinator is Dan Guides. He's a certified ISA arborist, just like Amy. He works with Gloria to oversee all the technical aspects of our program. We do usually have a tree city coordinator who was Matt. He left us in the spring. We haven't been able to refill that position yet. So that's still a vacant role, which actually Amy and I are kind of co-filling at the moment together with our new education assistant, who's a seasonal position, helping support the program with a bunch of other stuff. Besides the core urban and forestry team, we also work with grants administrators and our outreach staff in lands and forests. And then we also work with the other divisions. We have a division of communications. We have some of the other like division of water and stuff like that we may occasionally team up with on projects. Mostly it's communications when I'm doing work, but the grants and outreach team are within our division. So just a little bit of structure when we're talking about things. We then also have regional forestry staff. Those are the folks that are out in those regional offices I just showed you in the map. Amy is technically regional forestry staff serving regions 4 and 5, but based out of Albany with us, you know, just how some things work out. Our regional staff are much closer to most of the communities we're working with. That way they can, you know, do site visits, do inspections for grants and stuff like that. Our foresters, when we refer to them, cover a whole lot of fields. Besides our urban forestry program, our forestry staff are involved with state lands work, forest preserve work, if they're in the Adirondacks or the Catskills, private land stewardship work, and some other work like invasive species and things like that. So we work very closely with our regional staff. They're really our boots on the ground. I try to get out to all the regions every year, but sometimes I can't. So they're kind of the first line of contact for most folks. And then if they need additional support, they always have all of us who are coordinating the program. So that's kind of the New York staff at DEC. But as I mentioned, we work with a lot of partners to make this all happen in urban forestry. So the major partners that we have are the New York State Urban Forestry Council. I'm actually going to talk about them a little bit more on the next slide because they're a really critical partner in New York. The U.S. Forest Service, which is part of the Department of Agriculture. Obviously, Forest Service oversees a lot of the program at the federal level. As I mentioned, they get federal funding each year, which they then dole out to the states to help pay for all of the work getting done. And they occasionally have additional funding like the IRA. They've done some other specific grant programs that states can apply for on that. So we report annually to the Forest Service. We work very closely with our Forest Service partners. Their main office for our region anyways is out of Durham and out of Minnesota. We're part of a 20-state region that literally reaches from Maine to Minnesota, and then down to Maryland and Missouri. So it's a pretty big region that the Forest Service oversees. We have two main coordinators that we work with. One takes kind of the eastern half of the region and one takes the western half. And we're lucky that our Forest Service coordinator originally came from New York City Parks, so she's kind of familiar with the New York program. We also work very closely with the Arbor Day Foundation. Hopefully folks are familiar with them, national level nonprofit. We especially work with them on the Tree City USA program, Tree Line, Tree Camp, all of the tree campuses, I should say. There's several of those now, and some other efforts. I'm going to talk a little bit more about Tree City in some of the later slides as well, so I won't go into that too much more. We also work really well with the New York State Arborists Association. That is the New York chapter of the International Society of Arboriculture, ISA. People can become certified arborists through ISA, like Dan and Amy, which is essentially an additional certification and requires them to do continuing education credits to keep up their certification in arboriculture. And arboriculture is that study of trees at that kind of individual level. So they're our main partners at both national and state level. We work with them a whole lot on all kinds of things, but the council is really our closest partnership. They are required for us to have a forestry council. Every state, as part of the federal program, is supposed to have an advisory council that acts as an advisory group and provides additional input and information to the state program. So there are advisory council and there are partner in all things urban forestry in New York, especially in ReLeaf, where they help with the financial and contract side of getting events done. In addition, they offer some of their own smaller grant programs. Some of these are actually grant programs that we used to run out of DEC, and for various reasons, we don't run them anymore. And the council has taken them on with funding that we provide them. The two big ones are the Tree City Quick Start Grant and the Tree City Reward Grant. And those are $1,000 grants for communities to either become a tree city, that's the Tree City Quick Start Grant, or if they've been a tree city for 5 years, to be rewarded and recognized for that 5 continuous years as a tree city. So you can always learn more about that on their website. I have the link here right up. It's nysufc.org. They're our partner in all things ReLeaf. And like I said, they do those small ones. They're also doing I realized I should have updated this slide. They're now offering a third small grant, which I believe they extended the offering period on for schools who are looking to become tree campus K-12 schools. I think that one's $500, but you can learn about it on their website. It's on there with all of the great information. So those are our partners. Kind of have a grasp of urban forestry in broad strokes. Our team is structured and some of our big partners that we're working with. And now this is going to be a little bit more about the program itself. So overview of our program, we've got a couple main pillars that hold up our urban forestry umbrella. The first one's our grants program. We have a regular, sometimes biannual, every couple of years, state-funded grant program I'm going to talk about in a minute. ReLeaf, which we already introduced, is the part that I oversee. We also offer technical assistance to communities and groups that need some additional support and walkthroughs on things. The Tree City USA, Tree Campuses, and Tree Line programs, which I've alluded to, and we're going to go on them a little bit more in depth in a minute. We also do a couple, besides those 4 pillars, of odds and ends, I guess. We also have the Arbor Day poster contest. If you have seen any of those, they're often given out at State Fair or at events for Arbor Day all around the area. That's an annual poster contest. It is open now. If you have cool photos of trees or tree-related artwork you want to submit, you can search for Arbor Day Poster Contest New York, and that should bring up the page, especially if you go to dec.ny.gov. That's open through the end of the year. And then we pick our winners in January. We work with a printer and all of our partners on picking the winner, getting them printed, and then we get them distributed for Arbor Day next year. So if you're interested in submitting that, check it out now. We've been putting it out on social media and all that stuff. You may have seen some of us on social media because that's one of the other odds and ends we do. Our outreach team does Forest Friday posts, but we occasionally jump in and do some extra, informational posts, Facebook Lives. Dan was just live. I was filming and he was our speaker from Rome. Actually, yeah, from Rome a couple of weeks ago at the site of the tornado damage, talking about tree care post major storms. So we do a little bit of everything, but our 4 pillars are the grants, relief, technical assistance, and then the Tree City programs. Overarchingly, our program goals are to support communities working to develop sustainable urban and community forestry programs that includes trees at all levels of planning. The Forest Service has identified 4 core components of urban forestry programs, and that's the metrics that they use and request the states report on. And those 4 core components are a tree ordinance, a tree advisory or advocacy group, a management plan, and trained staff. So a tree ordinance is a rule or a law for the town or village that has, there's some requirements for each of these. For the ordinance, it needs to cover public trees. It needs to mention that you're going to follow best practices, along with a few other pieces that kind of gives the town some authority and guidance on how to handle trees, how trees are going to be included. There's multiple levels to ordinances, and you can go down a whole separate training topic on just writing tree ordinances. A tree advisory or advocacy group is really a critical part of a sustainable program to have that community engagement, to bring community members in and give them a place to talk about their trees, to be involved in decisions around trees, and recognizing that trees impact everyone. So that's another critically important part of a program. A management plan, and a good management plan is based on a tree inventory. So that's really kind of a super secret 5th core component, because you can't really have a management plan if you don't have a tree inventory. An inventory is exactly that. It is a long list, usually now a graphical map on a GIS system, so graphical information system, that notes every tree in a community, how big they are, how healthy they are, what species they are, recommended management for that tree, and then you build your plan based on that information. It's obviously hard to take care of things if you don't know what you have. So you take an inventory, and then you get a management plan, and you hopefully work towards the goals of your management plan for your urban forestry program. And the last piece the Forest Service looks at is having trained staff on hand in a community, recognizing that trees really need specialized care, and they live the longest when they're getting good best practices care. So a core component is that trained staff. I'd say that's probably one of the hardest pieces for most communities to come up with budgeting for. Although in recognizing this, contract staff can count if a community has an ongoing contract with an arborist, but these are kind of the 4 things we really encourage communities to be working towards. So the grant program, as I mentioned, is a state funded by the Environmental Protection Fund, that's the EPF. It was currently, I believe this past year was $3 million for the year. We aim to go out with these biannually. Our next date will hopefully be next year. We'll see how that works out with some back end stuff going on. I say aim for because we've been trying to get it on a 2-year schedule for the last 5 years, and things keep happening that push us a little bit further than the 2-year schedule we'd like, but generally every 3 years for sure. These are our central grants. There are 2 opportunities in these that are out every time. And one of those is for inventories and management plans. We encourage communities to do them together because it makes sense to package those together. And then the second opportunity here, this UCF2, are planting and or maintenance. So those are grants where communities apply to either plant a bunch of trees or to do maintenance on a bunch of trees. These are kind of our regular, long running. This next round will be round 17. So if we go out every couple of years, you can kind of do the math. We're talking, these have been going on for a pretty long time since the program really started. New York is lucky to be one of the few states that have state-funded urban grants. For a lot of states, the Inflation Reduction Act funding is the first time their state's been able to offer grants for urban forestry. There's only a handful of states, although there's been a handful. There's a few more states I know have begun to finally get their state governments to start providing funds. And I think part of that is that rolling snowball. When other states are offering it, they start going, well, if the other states are offering it, maybe we can offer it too. So we're very lucky, though, to have the Environmental Protection Fund in New York that's able to provide this funding for communities to do inventories, management plans, planting, and maintenance. There are occasionally extra grant funds that are funded by the Forest Service or sometimes other options. I mentioned the IRA already. So of that 1.5 billion, they gave some of that to the states who applied. New York received 12.9 million from that IRA for us to go out with our own round of grants. Those were actually just announced a couple weeks ago. Actually, that's not true. We announced them in July. We then announced a second amount of funding that went out to some of the projects who were able to scale up their projects a couple weeks ago. So that was two unique opportunities specifically for disadvantaged communities to implement management plans. So communities who had management plans were able to apply with those plans and say, my plan has a budget. I know I need to do this work. Can you fund paying this work? And that's what this money went towards. And that was the bulk of the money. There was a smaller amount that went towards ash tree removal, and it didn't require a management plan. So if you go to our website, or if you search for, I think, IRA, you can actually, it's just the grants page, has a link to the press releases, and you can see what communities received that funding this time. We have, actually, I'll pop back. We have done some others in the past couple of years. There was an emerald ash borer related pot of money the Forest Service had. So there was some grants for that. Every now and then there's some additional unique grants that come out on top of the standard state. So. The next main pillar is ReLeaf. This is the program I oversee. It's our education and outreach wing. This is really all of our involvement and community engagement type efforts. At ReLeaf itself is made up of regional committees around the state that aim to bring together arborists, DPWs, the Department of Public Works staff, other municipal staff, tree board members, volunteers, to network and learn and support each other. Just like this is all partnership work at the national level, we want to encourage these local partnerships, get people networked and connected so they can share the things that they're learning and find ways to support each other. And that sort of like, we're not working in our own silos. We'd spend a lot of time doing workshops and webinars on tree care, tree planting, safety, new research, and all kinds of things. If you go to dec.ny.gov, you can bring up the public calendar and search for ReLeaf, and you'll see our two events that are coming up. We have a webinar on November 1st. That's a Friday at noon on road salt and green infrastructure being given by Wei Zhang of Zennovation and the Soil Genomics Institute. So he's going to talk a little bit about some ways to kind of think about road salt and how to help the impacts of it on the soil and some ways to try to help mitigate that around trees. And then a little far for all of us up here in Albany, but we do have another workshop coming up down in Brooklyn, in New York City, that's on tree care, also on November 12th. Believe there's going to be another webinar hosted by our Long Island committee coming up in November as well, talking about Tree City USA. So if you're interested in these things, at the end, I'll have some more links. You can sign up for our monthly newsletter, and that will get you these email links where we always put out all the stuff that's coming up for grant opportunities and workshops and webinars and other training stuff. The other big part of ReLeaf, besides all the regular meetings, is an annual conference. It moves around the state. Last year we were in Albany. 2025, we are going to be out in our general Syracuse area, most likely Oswego, but we're in the middle of finding our host site right now. We generally host it at a college, if possible. Sometimes we've done hotels, and we bring in about 150 to 200 people, depending upon where we are. For our conference, it's a day, well, it's a day and a half long conference, but with travel time, and the first day has council meetings for our partner, the New York State Urban Forestry Council. So it's kind of like a 2 days conference spread out a little bit. We have exhibitors, we have tours, we get keynote speakers who come in. We've had Dan Lamb, the CEO of Arbor Day, come out as a keynote speaker. The leader of the Urban and Community Forestry Society, their director, Leslie Brooks, was out last year. Actually, American Forest was the keynote before that. I don't know who our keynote will be this year, but we try to bring in folks from all around and kind of have that funnel from national to local level. We really try to highlight the communities we're in with our tours, showing off some of the local parks and green infrastructure efforts. And it's a really great opportunity to connect and learn and grow. My favorite part is always seeing, as the coordinator during the event, when I get to actually take a breath, is seeing everyone chatting and changing information, seeing folks in Long Island, like the Long Islanders making connections with like City of Rochester staff, and just building those connections and networks so that people feel supported in urban forestry. There's a lot of really cool projects going on, and when you hit a stumbling block, chances are good someone's hit the same one and may have some advice for you. So we're always encouraging folks to just make those connections during the. I also mentioned our other pillar of technical assistance. That's tree care support and guidance for communities. Our foresters throughout the regions do things like help review tree species lists, planting plans, can help you talk about nursery stock review. A lot of this happens within the framework of the grant program, but it can also just be general help and support for a community. We also offer grant support. They can take a look at some of the grants that you're working on, and then obviously they do the inspections at the end. And our foresters help out with Arbor Day events, tree plantings, and that kind of fun thing in the springtime. I think every region, hopefully at least, is doing at least one Arbor Day event, since a lot of times that's when people reach out wanting a forester or someone there to help make sure the tree gets planted correctly at their Arbor Day celebration. So all kinds of stuff falls under the technical assistance umbrella. And then, as I mentioned, Tree City, Tree Line, there's Tree Campus K through 12, Tree Campus Higher Education, and Tree Campus Healthcare now. These are all programs of the Arbor Day Foundation. The Tree City, Tree Line, and Tree Campus Higher Education programs are done in partnership with the state. So those applications are reviewed by us, and then once we approve them, they go up to Arbor Day for approvals. The other ones are newer, and Arbor Day pretty much oversees those themselves. Tree City is really the bulk of it. That's where most of our focus is. If you're hearing me shorten it to just Tree City, I'm kind of grouping everything under that umbrella, but they do each have different program names. It's a recognition program in which communities reapply every year, certifying that they've met the 4 requirements, which is that they have a tree ordinance, they have either tree staff or a tree board, they've celebrated Arbor Day, and they spend at least $2 per capita on tree care. And that's a pretty broad category that includes everything from picking up leaves and storm damage to doing pruning and planting and removals. So $2 per capita is the requirement. In New York, the average is $8.12 last year. So it's obviously people are spending a lot more on tree care than they even quite realize they are. I've found a lot of communities, when they hear that, flinch a little bit at the idea of, oh, that's a lot per capita. And then when we sit down and do the math with them, they're always spending way more than the $2 is required. As of last year, we had 185 communities that were Tree City USA out of 800 or so that we've identified as places capable of having urban forestry programs. So that's cities, towns, villages. Hamlets don't count for us. So that kind of village is our lowest one setup that we go with. And then in the state, 67.92% live in a Tree City USA, which is pretty good. Most of the state is living in a Tree City USA community. When you fill out this application, they report things like how many trees have you planted. They ask some other questions during the application, and that's where Arbor Day is able to pull together this really cool infographic. Our largest city is always New York City. They've been a tree city for a pretty long time. Our smallest last year was Sharon Springs with a population of 504. Communities who have been tree cities for a while can also apply for what are called growth awards. So they've done something in addition to those basic requirements. There's a whole list of things, and they basically have to do a couple of them and meet some extra points. Ithaca always does growth awards. I think Syracuse has a couple of years. Saratoga has done a bunch of growth awards. So our longest running growth award is City of Ithaca as of last year. The program as of next year, Tree City is always a little tricky. You certify at the end of the year for the work you're doing now. So applications are open now, and cities are submitting their information for having celebrated in 2024. met all of the requirements, but we don't recognize them until the start of the following year when all the data has been processed. So we're always 1 year behind. So next year, or 2025 is the 50th anniversary. So we'll be celebrating in the start of 2026 with Arbor Day for the 50th anniversary of the Tree City USA program. Our longest running active community there is Poughkeepsie at 45 years. So almost since the whole program was conceived, they've been there. They're just a few years shy. We've got a couple right on Poughkeepsie's tail, so they can't ever miss a year. Cities are able to qualify or certify themselves 1 year. And if they don't do the paperwork the next year, and then 2 years down the road, they do it again because they celebrated Arbor Day, they recertify and that number keeps going. So some of our communities kind of dip in and out of the program. Some of them are really good about consistently being in it every year, celebrating Arbor Day and recognizing their trees. And Poughkeepsie's our longest running one, which is pretty cool. Tree Campus Higher Education on here, we do have 23 colleges that participate in that program, and 5 of the utilities in New York participate in the Tree Line USA. We don't currently have any Tree Campus Healthcare. That's a super new program, which is why they just have the state map there that kind of shows some of the states that do have one. But maybe eventually we'll have one of the hospitals or healthcare campuses interested in one. So that's all of my urban forestry information. I do have a few slides about the 25 Million Trees Initiative. And then I'm going to wrap up with some ways to get involved, and then we'll be ready to take questions. So 25 million trees is a comprehensive initiative to scale up tree planting and stewardship in New York State. It was announced in the State of the State back in January by Governor Hochul. The initiative is focused on expanding the seed supply chain, increasing tree production, and supporting public and private tree planting projects to grow new forests and engage the next generation of tree stewards. This little slide here has some of the basic, just little bits about the plan. It's supposed to be 25 million trees by 2033. Part of that is going to be modernizing the Saratoga Tree Nursery. That is based in Saratoga. It's the only remaining state tree nursery that we have. New York used to have several. We are working on scaling up the seed collection and production and modernizing that nursery and hoping it'll be a model for other public and private nurseries in the area. That's also connecting to the Bond Act that was approved. So some of the funding from the Bond Act is going to go towards Saratoga Tree Nurseries improvements and modernizations. If you've ever ordered any of the school seedling program or the spring seedling sale, those all come from Saratoga Tree Nursery, where they're just growing all kinds of seedlings and native trees. Some of it's going to aim to support community reforestation. We're looking at doing new grant programs. There's been 15 million approved for those grants. Believe we're hoping to do those at the end of this year still, but there's still a lot to be worked out with the grant program. It will be for municipalities, nonprofits, and potentially some other groups, and focusing on areas that are impacted by climate change challenges. There's also some other Bond Act money going into some technology and engaging the next generation. I'm not as familiar on those, so I'll let these two little bits speak for themselves. But engaging the next generation will involve the ReLeaf program at some level as we work to figure out all the pieces of 25 million trees. So that'll include things like Arbor Day events, stewardship, education programs, climate core type models, connecting to some of the SCA programs that New York already has. The Excelsior Core is an education and youth outreach program that is in partnership with the Student Conservation Association. It's run by our education group where I used to work before I came to urban forestry. So some of the models like that and getting youth more engaged in work that's going on. Every New Yorker can contribute to the goal of 25 million trees planted by 2033, and every tree planted will be counted towards that goal. And soon we'll be launching the tree tracker tool where you can plot any trees you planted, backdated all the way to January 1st of this year on our statewide map. So that's been one of the big tech pieces getting work done in the background. And they're hoping to launch the tree tracker tool soon so that people can put in their information and collect that. The New York State, we are working with a bunch of opportunities that this has brought about, trying to expand those partnerships with other state agencies, working with in DEC across our different divisions and across our different groups, and connecting urban forestry too with some of the private lands work that's going on. Regenerate New York is a program that the Private Lands Program runs. That's a grant program. There's also New York Connects with Ag and Markets. The main grant, hopefully coming out soon, will be this CORE grant, and that's short for Community Reforestation. And that's why I had to pause, because I used to refer to our urban and community forestry state grants as our, like our core grants, as in like core to the program, but I can't because now CORE is going to be an actual grant name. So the community reforestation grants are going to be focused on reforestation and afforestation in natural areas, in public kind of areas. It's a little bit very new for us in urban forestry. This kind of shift a little bit to some of the natural areas. So we're thinking more like parks, especially some of the parks that maybe have a little bit more of a forested area, more than just landscaped. But those grant details are getting ironed out, and hopefully will be out before the end of the year. So again, if you're interested, sign up for our email newsletters, because as soon as those get announced, they'll be announced via press release, and in our monthly newsletter, there'll be more information about those grant opportunities as they are available. So I always like to end with my get involved pitch as the person that runs ReLeaf for our education and outreach efforts. Some of the ways people can get involved are to join our partner organization, the council. They are member based. They support us in all of our programming and get involved with ReLeaf. You can attend your regional ReLeaf committees. Talk to Amy if you want to join the Region 4 one. She's always scheduling those and looking for folks to join those meetings. You can attend one of these workshops or webinars that I brought up on tree care, or the one that our partners are running, especially before Arbor Day. You can plant a tree in your neighborhood and make sure that you're picking something that's the right tree for the right place, and use some of the resources available to double check that. You can participate in your community's Arbor Day celebration. And if they're not having one, reach out and see if you can encourage your community to have an Arbor Day celebration or host your own. There's plenty of ways that you can celebrate Arbor Day every day with trees in your neighborhood. And you can also work to either join your local tree board, or again, if your community isn't participating, a lot of urban forestry has come from a grassroots level. So community members can always encourage their communities to get involved, to think about trees, to reach out and connect with these grant programs, and help your community trees. So there's lots of ways to get involved with ReLeaf and the urban forestry program, and we encourage you to consider doing so. My closing thought is always, why urban trees? Why plant trees? I know it's a long-standing mantra that, you know, the best time to plant a tree was 50 years ago, and the second best time is now. But I really like this comment that Beatrice said. She's our Assistant Director of Urban and Community Forestry Programs at the Forest Service. So she's that high level, and really great, very much so a fearless leader for urban forestry in New York. And she said, legacy isn't what you do for yourself, it's what you do for those you leave behind. And I think when we're planting trees, that's a really critical thing to keep in mind, that all of these new young little trees we may not ever see the full benefits of, but we're doing it for everyone that comes after us. And with that, I can open up to questions. For general emails on here, my email's on here, the rest of our team, all of us with Dan Lamb at our conference. And you can always find us on Facebook, Twitter, Flickr for New York State DEC, and watch for the next time that we do a live event. Or keep out an eye for any of our social media posts on upcoming events.
Oh, Christina, that was just great. Could I ask, if you stop sharing screen, we can see everybody, and I'll let people unmute themselves and jump in with questions. I can start with one. Is there any kind of merit or certification or program that awards school grounds, you know, instead of Tree City, like Tree School Ground?
Yes. So there's the Tree Campus K through 12. We don't directly oversee that, but Arbor Day does. It has 4 pillars, much like that seems to be the magic number for Arbor Day. So Tree Campus K through 12, they need to have like a tree team. They need to do something hands-on tree related with their students, and they have to celebrate Arbor Day, and they have to include trees in their curricula. I believe those are the 4 requirements for that. And there are, as I said, the council is beginning to offer some funding for schools who are interested. And I know that Project Learning Tree, which is if you've ever heard of that from environmental education, it's a environmental educator's book, also for teachers. They are based out of the Sustainable Forestry Institute, and they've been looking for more ways to partner with Arbor Day. And so they started offering some discounts and partnerships with tree schools who are looking to do that. Since if you want to include it in your curriculum, Project Learning Tree already does that. It's an easy way to fold Project Learning Tree in.
Okay, great. Sandra, I see your hand up there.
Well, actually, it's Harry.
Oh, okay.
I
Couldn't tell
think
from the hand.
interesting presentation. I think I heard you say that there are grants available for developing municipal management plans.
Correct.
And I'm just wondering if there are required components of these plans before a grant is awarded. For example, planting appropriate species of trees in appropriate locations, and also requiring that before a municipality can remove a tree, it has to there have to be good reasons for it, and there has to be an attempt to, if possible, replace the tree with an appropriate type of replanted tree.
So that's 2 questions. I'm going to split that up. Yes, our grants for the management plans are available, and they have, there are standards in there. If you go to the urban forestry page, you can there's a whole long list of what needs to be in a management plan. The request for applications for the grants will go through that. We do have some requirements that go in the plan. So that would include things like your management plan usually has recommendations for planting. It should be based off of your inventory. There are some core components that go into a plan. But a requirement to plant when you take down would be part of something more like a tree ordinance, and we don't have a requirement for that. Some communities put those in their ordinances, some don't. And that's kind of up to the community process as they work through that ordinance approval process.
Some other questions? I was wondering, you oversee education in your role too. Do you have any lesson plans in general about urban forestry for children that you could share with us to deliver?
Off the top of my head, I don't. We could probably look through what we have. I mean, I know Amy was just doing one for invasive species today. I've done Project Learning Tree a bunch, so a lot of what I do is very focused, just borrows from that. I think they've got a really nice program, and we're looking to partner with them more in the next year and bring that into some of our urban forestry youth education efforts. But none of them really jumped to mind in terms of an easy lesson plan. As a former environmental educator, I was a little more, I guess, flexible. I tended to just kind of go with the flow with what the kids were interested in and talking about trees and how they function. When we do our big City of Albany does their Arbor Day event, we are usually involved in it. We've actually condensed the state event and the city event into one, which is way more convenient for us. And when we do that, Cornell usually comes and talks about tree rings and tree growth and some basics with the kids group. It's usually middle school. So that's a good lesson for them. But yeah, I could probably dig up some good recommendations. There's a lot out there, but I don't have any that jump to the top of my head.
I have the Project Learning Tree, but I think I got it like 25, 30 years ago or something. So I probably should see how I could get an updated version.
Yeah, I think they're working on yet another new version because there's definitely at least one before that one. And I know they do offer those periodically. If you search for Project Learning Tree, it'll direct you to our state coordinator, who's Betsy Eucharitis, and she can connect you with workshops and events. And then I think we're hopefully planning one for early next year, a project learning tree workshop here in Region 4, 4 and 5 for both, really. So we're hoping to do that, and there'll be an opportunity to get the book, because for New York pays for those guidebooks. Some of the other states don't, but we buy the guidebooks and then we give them out for free as long as you attend the class that teaches you kind of how to use the book and gets you connected. So we're hoping to do an urban forestry focused version of Project Learning Tree and introduce a couple of their new modules. If you go to their website in the last couple of years, they've got one on green jobs and they've got one on brown faces and green spaces. So they've been doing these little, like, I think Betsy said they're technically a mini curriculum book. Like it's a pull together of some of the other lessons they have, but it's not the full size book focused on just green jobs in recognition of the interest in connecting youth to green jobs in tree care and urban forestry. So that's going to be our workshop topic. Hopefully we got to talk next week about planning it.
Okay, excellent. I'll watch out for that. Nancy, are you raising your hand?
Yeah. I know there's an electronic hand I could have raised, but
I haven't figured that out either.
I was thinking about that. You had mentioned the Saratoga Tree Nursery, which my concept of it was that it sells things in large quantities, and so if you don't need a large quantity, it's not the place to go. I was wondering if there were particular tree nurseries that are local that you would be likely to recommend because they have good advice for people who have a specific situation, or how would that work?
So, yep, the Saratoga Tree Nursery focuses on seedlings, and their sale is, I think the minimum is often 25 seedlings in a bag. I should know it because I've gone up there to help out during the bagging process. I was the one labeling all of the bags last time. So it is meant for bigger groups. They've always had a focus on that reforestation, people who are looking to like replant a big area with something slightly bigger. But they're still seedlings, so very young trees, just a couple of years old. In terms of local nurseries, I believe if you go to Ag and Markets, they keep a list of all the nurseries in the area. Capital Mohawk Prism might also have some good advice in terms of places that can carry some native trees. I don't have any particular suggestions in this area, but there's lots around the state. Not as many. I know we are right now, nurseries are definitely hitting overloads with, there's been a twofold issue for nursery stock in the last couple of years that was part of the reason we want to improve Saratoga Tree Nursery. One, all of this Inflation Reduction Act funding means people are all planting. That's a lot of money and that's a lot of trees, which is, but it also means that's a high demand on an industry that takes several years to get things grown to the size that people are looking for. So there's a little bit of a bottleneck. And the second thing was during the pandemic, when everyone was doing yard work and landscaping, a lot of them started selling some of the even younger trees because there was such a demand from just the residential area. So they're still kind of catching up from that in that terms of an industry that takes several years. So just be aware you may have to shop around if you're looking for something because there's a little bit of a stock issue going on with some of the nurseries in the area. Well, in the country, I should say, it's not just the area.
So does anyone on here know who Niskuna partnered with, the town of Niskuna partnered with for that Arbor Day seedling giveaway? I don't think it was Saratoga.
No, I
Because we
don't
gave
know who
away-
it was.
We
Yeah,
were giving away
I could
one
ask
to
them.
the person.
Yeah.
Oh, I've been talking away and I'm muted. I have one last quick one. The grants you talk about, of course, are focused on planting and maintenance and inventories and management plans. Is there any kind of a small grant? We are looking to open with other partners a new environmental center in Schenectady.
Yes.
And one of the things I'd love to do is, talk more about urban forestry. Is there any kind of grant that might be focused on exhibits and interpretation?
Are
And
you working with Betsy Henry on that?
She's not a direct partner, but I know
Okay.
Betsy, and
Okay, so it's not, can't remember. There is a grant that just came out in support of environmental education centers in disadvantaged communities, because I forwarded it to Betsy and she mentioned interest in doing one in Schenectady. There was a New York State press release. I'll have to send you the link.
would you?
I have to dig it up.
Okay.
It wasn't ours, but I saw it in a press release and I sent it to a bunch of folks I know. That just came out about doing that. So I don't know that it's exhibit focused. I think it's more like getting places started. But I will send you that link because I sent it to her
great.
and she mentioned there was interest and I was like, it's not our grant, so we could help out with it, which is always nice. That's a whole rabbit hole when it comes to like grants and embargoes and stuff like that. Like when a grant is open, if we're one of the reviewers, we can't talk about it because we're a reviewer. So like it's nice for us to have regional staff because the regional staff can provide questions and support when we can't. Actually the last round, Amy was our go-to because Amy can talk to the community. She was not a reviewer, but I was. But for a grant like this education center one, it's coming from a different, I don't know which agency it was. I just saw the press release and was like, ooh, I know people who'd be interested in this. And so I said I'd be more than happy to help with fitting community forestry into this and helping out with it because it's a unique opportunity and I don't see a lot of grants for environmental education centers and for environmental education in general. I was environmental educator for the state for 2.5 years before this, and before that I was 5 or 6 years down at Hike Preserve in Southern Albany County. So at the nonprofit I was always looking for opportunities like that, and it's hard, there's not a lot for those. But I will send you that link.
Okay,
sure.
great. Exhibits are expensive, so
They are.
Yep.
They are, and they take a beating if you get popular.
Take a beating if you do it.
If they get popular, like because everybody's using them, and like I don't think most people think of how all those people's hands on things. I'm always like, wow, you can have a lot of maintenance on exhibits, a lot too. Like that's a big cost for museums and education centers.
Yes.
What did
Especially
Betsy say
kids.
she was interested in? Christina, what did Betsy say she was interested in?
The environmental education center aspect.
Okay.
She mentioned there was interest in that when I had sent it to her.
Oh, anybody else have anything to add? This was really informative, very inspiring. So thank you so much. And I know other people, are going to be listening to the recording as well.
Well, as I said, our emails were on the end, so you can always reach out to urbanforestry@dec.ny.gov if you have questions, and we'll get it over to the right person to help answer those.
Okay, well, thank you so much, both Amy and Christina. And our next Zoom will be November 21st, and you'll be as surprised as I am to see who our speaker is. I've reached out to several, but we will be here 7 o'clock on the 21st with somebody. And I guess that's about it. Thank you again. Really appreciate it.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
All right.
Have a good night, everyone. Bye.